everybody. My name is Angie Viscianen, and I am the founder of Leg Up Legal. We provide a mentoring program that connects prospective law students to lawyers for mentoring. And we started doing these Zoom meetups pretty much at the start of COVID-19, just to allow people to start interacting with other prospective law students, current law students, and lawyers. And then we opened it up to everyone. So now I promote them on LinkedIn and Instagram and Facebook. So we get people from all over. It's not just people in our mentoring program, but so I've been bringing in guest speakers every single week to chat with you guys about different topics that I think will help you navigate law school and the legal profession better. And today I have a very special guest with me. Her name is Judith Gordon, and she is the founder of her own consulting agency, as well as a lecturer at UCLA School of Law. And she is here to talk to you about balancing the practice of law with your life. So Judith, I'll let you take it away.
Great, thank you. Hi everyone. I want to give you a little background story and why I think it's so great that you're all in the room today. So I teach a class at UCLA Law School called The Law in Your Life, and it's really about really finding satisfaction in the legal profession. And we'll go through a little bit about what happens when you go to law school. But this is the kind of thing that would be good to know before you go to law school. So I found myself, kind of a number of years into practice, looking around and feeling pretty miserable, which is not uncommon among lawyers, and wondering what was wrong. And I wasn't very clear about that. And so I started to do a lot of self-reflection and recognized that the work was cool and the people were nice, but what I cared about was not the work I was doing. And so there was a disconnect. And the research shows that when our values, our intrinsic drivers, and what we care about, the work that we do, diverge, our well-being plummets, right? So there I was like, classic case of a divergence between what matters to me most and the work I was doing. And then I came across, so I went through that process. I found work that I enjoyed. I made that shift, and it was a learning process. And that's a resilience thing. And maybe we'll have some time to talk about resilience too, because what we're all going through right now is resilience building, but very painful too. So I went through my own process, and then I happened to come across some research by a law professor that showed that this disconnect begins in law school. And Angie and I were just starting to talk about that before we came on. And that is that you go in with certain goals and motivations, what the kind of lawyer you want to be or why you're going to law school. And then you get inundated with all the work of law school, and A, you forget, and B, law school doesn't care about what you care about. They just care about getting you through. So they don't really care why you went to law school. They're there to train you. And so they focus on the training. So when the focus is only on the training and not on the why, there's this disconnect. So it's really important to stay connected to your why. So why are we talking about this? Now, I do start with this, and actually when you graduate law school and you do continuing legal education, one of the topics is competency, and the reason is because there is widespread suffering in the legal profession, and the research shows that it starts in law school, and we're going to go through that a little bit so you're kind of prepared for what you're getting into. But these are just some of the websites that lawyers have put up because of their experiences, and they're really useful and helpful, but I don't want to take you down a rabbit hole of this is terrible, but it's really important to know what can happen and how to prevent it. I already talked a little bit. This is the research paper that I came on across that opened my eyes. And the good news, it's preventable, it's reversible, and we can do something about it. And there's a whole well-being movement in the legal profession. So if you are really devoted to going to law school, you'll have support and you'll have help. I'm going to just skip this. This is what it looks like to be in law school. But these are some of the reasons in law school there's a disconnect between the linear analytical thinking that we learn to do in law school, which can be very useful, but is not really a life skill, right? So we have a tendency to over-apply analytical thinking to the emotional events that occur in our lives, and that doesn't work. So I'm just gonna blow through this, because what I really want to do is focus on intrinsic and extrinsic motivation and keeping you all connected to what matters most. So humans are meaning-making machines, and since the beginning of time, we've used stories to share our knowledge and what matters most and to build civilization. And embedded in those stories are the values that humans have, what matters to us most, what connects us to each other, why are we doing what we're doing. And when those things are prevalent, we thrive because they're all interconnected. And like I already mentioned, when that disconnect occurs, that well-being plummets. Unfortunately, it's very common, not just in law, it's primarily common in law, the percentages are higher, but in tech, in medicine. So it's really important to stay connected to that why. We are in a work-driven society, and so we tend to focus on the work and on the outcomes, and we forget to focus on who's driving those outcomes. So there is that disconnect. So, and it starts with knowing what matters to us most. What matters to me may not matter as much to Angie. We may care about some of the same things, but it may not be what gets her out of bed in the morning. So we have to know what gets us out of bed in the morning and actually think about that in the morning, believe it or not. So our motivation, what propels us into action, is what fuels that inner drive to thrive. So we all, need to survive, want to survive. We all have to focus on the basics. How do I put food on the table and a roof over my head? But beyond that, how do we thrive? What really makes us feel like our lives are interesting and worthwhile and meaningful? And we find that out by identifying our core values, the why of our practice. So let's talk a little bit about intrinsic motivators. What is that thing that gets me out of bed in the morning? And I'm just going to use some examples so that, so I'm not just blah, blah here. So one example is if I'm going to run a marathon, and if I'm running that marathon because I want that medal with the ribbon at the end, then it might be hard for me to get out of bed in the morning when it's 5 a.m. and it's raining and it's cold. It gets cold even in Southern California at 5 a.m. in the morning, and it does rain. Our marathon is in the winter. So that could be really tough. Am I going to really want to get out of bed at 5 a.m. for a ribbon and a chunk of metal? Maybe not. But if I know that I'm doing this because I'm raising funds for a cause that's meaningful to me, then just thinking about that will get me up. It'll get me out because it's bigger than me. It's something that I care about. It fuels that inner drive to thrive. So the motivation really needs to be intrinsic. Another example that I love to use, well, let me tell you about extrinsic motivation first, and then we'll talk about intrinsic. We'll talk about some other examples. So if Angie says to me, I'll pay you $50 to run that marathon, that may or may not be enough depending on my situation to get me out of bed in the morning. But the $50 is a carrot, right? That's a carrot stick. It's purely extrinsic. What level of reward do we have to have in order to get us to do something? What extrinsic motivator? So I think a really great TED Talk, if you all are, no, it's not a TED Talk. It's an animation by Daniel Pink. And I can't tell if y'all are familiar with Daniel Pink, but he did a great 9-minute video called Drive, and I can circulate the link to it afterward, about what motivates us. And it talks a lot about this kind of thing, and that just extrinsic rewards like more money doesn't do it. It doesn't get us out of bed in the morning. So an example I really like to use is the Ferrari example. So say you want a Ferrari. That's a perfectly legitimate desire. But the value of that Ferrari will depend entirely on whether you're intrinsically or extrinsically motivated. So if I'm extrinsically motivated for the Ferrari, meaning I want to buy that Ferrari so that I can show the world, hey, I have made it as a lawyer, and look how cool I look, and what do you think of that color? Then it's an image thing. An image is an extrinsic motivator. I want to have a good image. It's different than reputation, by the way. So my image, my show of wealth, status, those are extrinsic motivators. And even if I get that Ferrari, that satisfaction will be fleeting. It doesn't last. So maybe for the first week or 2 weeks or day, that's how long that motivation that satisfaction from having a Ferrari would last, but not very long. However, if I'm intrinsically motivated to buy a Ferrari because I have a passion for racing, or I have a passion for speed, for autonomy and adventure, then every time I take that Ferrari to a speedway and, just crush it, hit the pedal to the metal, I am intrinsically enjoying that Ferrari, that car. If I enjoy, driving it up a mountain road, or the adventure, the places I can go with that kind of car, then that's intrinsic motivation. I am getting continual satisfaction from that purchase. So I kind of wanted to focus on knowing the why in everything. It's not just, we're talking about a career, and I'm focusing on small things, but it goes into everything, because if I want to go to law school, it'll be, people will look up to me, and people will think I'm smart, and I might make a pretty good living, and I can buy the things I want. Those are purely extrinsic motivators. And it's going to be really hard to persevere when the going gets tough. Things get really tough in law school. So we need the intrinsic motivator. It's like the marathon. Law school is a marathon. Practicing law is a marathon. It is not a sprint. It's for the long haul. So I have to know why I am doing this. Why am I putting myself through this? There are a lot of ways I can go out there and make a living. So why am I putting myself through the legal profession in particular? I've got to know why, so that when shit happens, I can still keep going, because it does. So when obstacles show up, look, we're in a pandemic, we're in the midst of some very important social change, hopefully, and these things are really powerful, and they're also very disruptive. So how do we persevere in the face of this? People have lost their jobs. It's really hard for them to think about social change when they can't put food on the table. So how do we persevere? We have to know what's driving us. And these are the kinds of things that can happen in 10 or 20 years when you get out and you're practicing. So it's important to keep in mind that when you choose a profession, that you choose one that you can stick with for the long haul. So I like to call intrinsic motivation the fire in the belly, and extrinsic motivation is the fire under the derriere. That's kind of how it helps me. Like, does it light a fire in me? Does it get me going? Okay, this is good. And I actually use that for decision making sometimes. If I'm not sure about something, I'll get kind of quiet and very clear about what those somatic experiences are. And that's a whole other subject. But staying connected to our somatic experience is really, really important, especially in law school, which is very cognitive. It is purely cognitive. And that is part of what the problem is that it disconnects us from our emotional and our somatic experiences. We have to keep those connected in order to stay in tune with what's driving us and decision making. Decision making is an emotional process. We use data to justify our decisions. So it's a combination of cognitive and emotional, but it's driven by the emotions. So understanding these things, but understanding these things is really, it's important. And again, because law school is cognitive and focused on linear thinking, it's up to each of us to stay aligned with our values and our reasons for doing what we're doing. And you will find support. There are ways to find support. I don't want you to think that it's like all an uphill battle, but there are many. And the good news too is that legal education is recognizing this, and there's been a lot of pressure on law schools to make these changes, which is why I get to teach the class that I teach. So here are some of the ways that you can identify your values. What gives my life meaning? Without this thing, what would life feel like? So the third question rather, is actually one that helped me a lot, because I never thought of sustainability as a value, but when I looked at how I live my life and the efforts that I go to lower my carbon footprint, I realized, oh, that's a value. So there are a lot of ways that we can kind of identify our values. What gets me lit, what excites me in the morning or in the evening, what makes me lose track of time? That's one of my favorite questions. What makes you lose track of time? And anyway, all my students have to do an essay, not an essay, they have to write a paragraph or two on what their personal definition of success, right? And it's really important to think about, because if you are pursuing somebody else's definition of success, then man, you're going to wake up one day and go, what happened? Where did my life go? And that's essentially what happened to me, because my parents told me what success was, and my teachers told me what success was, and lawyers told me what success was, and I never stopped to think about what would it look like for me to be successful. What do I care about? So think about that for a few minutes, and it can modify, shift. It's not going to shift entirely. It's just different priorities. Like before you have a family, one thing may be important. After you have a family, knowing what matters to you most, what's that inner fire, is really, really important. I always like to talk about, and this is my last slide. I have a joke after this, but what is happiness? Because our Bill of Rights that says that guarantees the right to pursue happiness, right? I have some problems with that, because I think that most of us associate happiness with a feeling of being up. I don't have problems with the guarantee of the right to pursue happiness, but with how we talk about happiness. I think it's really important to understand that happiness is not always feeling giddy and upbeat. That happiness includes all of our emotions, even anger and sadness and anxiety, but mostly being on the intrinsic motivation side of happiness, on the recognition that life satisfaction, appreciation, meaning and fulfillment, interest, right, curiosity, those are happiness too. So what is your definition of happiness? Because we're not always going to feel great. It's just not how humans are wired. We're not wired to feel happy all the time. So we're wired, though, to find meaning. Like we said in the very beginning of this little chat, we are wired for story, for connection, for meaning, and to make a difference. But the good news is that financial wealth does correlate with intrinsic motivation. So people who are intrinsically motivated tend to be financially successful as well. So stay on that road of intrinsic motivation, do what matters to you most, and you will find a means and a way to create the financial wealth that goes with it, right? So, and there was a research study done, I'll end on this, and I like Ralph Waldo Emerson's, on the right side you can see his definition of happiness. It's longer than that, but that's kind of where we're going. The research study that followed 1,500 MBA students, 1,250 graduated and got jobs and followed the money, and 250 said, screw the job, I'm going to do something interesting. And of the total 1,500, only one of the 1,250 became a millionaire, but almost all of the 250 who followed their interests became millionaires. So that's the interesting correlation. So be very clear about what's interesting to you, because that also ties in with your ultimate financial success. It does not mean you won't be financially successful, even if you're just, doing something you don't love. It just means that you might not be as, happy and satisfied. So this is a little bit, I don't know if it's complex, but there's a lot of concepts there. So I think the bottom line is know what motivates you, what drives you, stick with what's interesting to you, focus on that. Law school is going to distract you from that. Keep course correcting, make sure you keep asking yourself, why am I doing this? A good time to do that is when you're pulling an all-nighter. It's like, okay, why am I doing this? And then carry on. And I think got a little joke. That's all for me there.
Yeah, I wanted to take a moment to comment on some of the things that you were saying, Kathy, about well-being and what drives us and figuring out what that is. Because I am fascinated about the science of well-being. I came across this class taught by a Yale professor on the science of well-being a few weeks ago on Coursera, and it's a free course that you can take. It's hosted by this professor that has been teaching the science of well-being course at Yale that ended up being the most popular course at Yale. Like not any other substantive class, but this class on well-being was extremely popular because people were like, why am I not happy? Why am I not happy in the pursuit of success? I'm at Yale. I've worked so hard to get here, and why am I miserable? And I think, a lot of law students feel that way. It's like, I've been chasing this dream for so long. Why am I not happy once I get it? When I'm finally a practicing attorney, why does it not make me happy? And what she came across was, it's fascinating because there were 3 different types of pursuits of happiness. Okay, so you can find, and there's a TED Talk about this too. The pursuit of happiness as in pleasure. That's the most temporary, the most fleeting pursuit of happiness. Okay, the pursuit of happiness in engagement, where you're, so basically you have figured out that when you try to be present in the moment and stretch out the time that you are engaged in some activity that brings you happiness, you figure out a way to slow your life down so you can really savor those moments of happiness. That is the pursuit of engagement. That's a good, lasting happiness. But the third, the pursuit of meaning, was actually the most long-lasting effect of happiness. If you search for meaning in your life and you continue to drive towards that meaning and connect that meaning to everything that you do in your life, you will find that actually prolongs your overall happiness much more than you would think. So simply living a life that is, devout of unpleasurable things, sure, that kind of keeps you happy. But you'll find that you feel unhappy more often, and that your happiness is more fleeting when you do that. But when you truly search for meaning in your life, and you feel like everything that you're doing is aligned with that meaning, it completely changes everything for you. So I think that it's totally right that you tap into your values, figure out what drives you. And I tell people, if the reason you want to go to law school is because you want to help people, that's great. But the more specific that you can get with that reason, the more clear that vision will become. And so it's not about, living this cliche of I just want to help people. Like a lot of people are like, is that too cliche? And I'm like, no. That's a good reason to go to law school. But you got to drill down deeper. Who are you trying to help? What do you want to accomplish with it? Why do you want to help people? Was there something in your past that created this want, this drive to help people? You got to dig deeper than that. If you don't want it to just be a cliche, if you want to actually be living that mission, you've got to make it as specific as possible. But
yeah, I agree 1,000%, obviously, from what you just saw, and which is what drove me to do the course. And building on that, recognizing that even when we're helping people, we can experience burnout. So we have to be able to recognize when we have to be able to balance the help of others with the help of ourselves, and being able to recognize when we're helping others at the expense of ourselves. So recognizing that balance, recognizing what our needs are as well, so I think that drilling down into that help and knowing when to take a pause and say, okay, I'm helping, but I'm getting drained and I need to recharge so I can go out and help again. But we get on this hamster wheel and it gets really hard to get off. So it's really important to stay really in tune. I loved what you said about slowing down time and stretching it out. That's where that, what makes you lose track of time? That's engagement, that flow. There's a great book by a psychologist named Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, which is about flow, and that's that engagement. So recognizing these different areas and then being able to kind of jump back and forth, because sometimes we are going to be on the treadmill and we have to, but knowing how to, it's kind of like knowing how to drive the car, slow down, speed up, brake, pause, stop, reverse. Yeah. Great point. I have to watch that course. I got the link, but I forgot about it.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good. And it's so interesting, just the way that they break it down to a science. Like, I don't know. I feel like a lot of the concepts are things that we feel inherently, but we don't know how to formulate that into words. And so as you read these studies and these papers that she's compiled in this course, you're like, oh my gosh, it's giving, articulation to all of these things that I've felt forever. I just didn't know how to say it for myself,
To that point, the reality is that a lot of it has to do with culture change. And I'm not going to go on about this, but our culture has changed, our Western culture has changed so that we have shifted our values from intrinsic to extrinsic. But if you look at other cultures, there are still other cultures that are intrinsically motivated, and they have higher degrees of satisfaction and meaning. They have less illness. They take time for sharing, for relaxation. We don't do that. We have to force people to relax in this country and insist that you take a break for 5 minutes. But in other cultures, it's part of their process, and it's how they connect. They take time to sit around as families or in groups and share stories. So there's a culture shift that has occurred, has a lot to do with industrialization, and we've lost some of it. So we're really getting back to what you were saying, our human roots. We know this intuitively. We understand.
When I was in private practice, so trademark law, we work with a lot of foreign counsels and other jurisdictions who help our clients file trademarks abroad, right? And some of them, some of the lawyers that we worked with had 4-day work weeks. And
right.
Some of the lawyers that we worked with could take sabbaticals for like 3 months of the year. And so like, I remember sending an email to one of my foreign counsels, and I got this email back, this auto response that was like, I'm on sabbatical for 3 months. And I was like, what would that be like? Like, in my brain, I just couldn't even process it, because like, I think in America, we're just like, we're driven to work. And you almost feel bad about taking that vacation, that time for yourself that you need to recharge. And for me, I worked at several firms where the vacation policy was, oh, we're not going to cap how many days that you can take. We're not going to assign how many days that you have for vacation. You can technically go whenever the firm can spare you, which is never.
Not to mention that you're required to check in while you're on vacation.
Oh, yeah. And I was insane about checking email when I would be on vacation. I took so many vacations where I was frantically checking email, just like this brainwashed robot, constantly. First thing I wake up in the morning, I'm like, oh my gosh, do my clients need something? And it was just frantic and crazy. And after I actually left the law to launch Leg Up Legal, I took my first real vacation where I went and just literally laid on a beach in Thailand for like 2 weeks. And it was so liberating. And I think we constantly feel that pressure. Like, I cannot rest. I cannot take a break. But what you don't realize when you're doing all of that is that it's hurting you somehow. It's causing your work product not to be as good. It's causing you to get burned out. it's causing so many things that you don't realize that it's happening to you. So it is super important to take that time, take those breaks, build that into your life, because if you don't build that into your life, you won't take it. You've got to schedule that time for yourself. And, even if it's, I'm going to block out 3 hours of, my Friday to just literally, unplug from everything and relax. And, and I think that it sounds crazy to block off those times on your calendar because you're so used to blocking it off for meetings or things related to work or school. But I mean, you really do need to start blocking that time in your life, because once you go to law school, you'll find that all your time is going to be taken from you, and you need to take it back somehow. So block out that time for you. But yeah, I wanted to go ahead and start opening it up for the Q&A, if that's okay with you, Judith?
Absolutely, I'd love it.
Perfect. I think we already have a question in the chat box. Did you have a citation for that study about the MBA success?
Yes, I do.
All right.
It's a study by Mark Albion. It's a little old at this point, and he's a former Harvard Law, and the study was done, I think the study was done with Wharton MBAs. I'm just putting this all in the chat. And he has a website called The Good Life. I think it's called The Good Life.
There you go.
And I'm putting it in the chat right now. So if you can Google any of those elements, you'll find that little study.
Okay, awesome.
And there's a little video. It's an interesting video, an animated video that encapsulates this idea of intrinsic versus what are we chasing? What are we chasing and why? Right? So let me put in also Dan Pink. He has a 9-minute RSA animated video on Drive, What Motivates Us. And I found that to be really eye-opening. And we've used that book in my class.
Reed, would you mind dropping the Science of Wellbeing course link into the chat box as well?
Yeah.
I don't have it readily available. Sorry. Yeah, so does anybody have any questions for Judith? Feel free to start unmuting yourselves and jumping right in. You don't have to type them in the chat box. You can engage.
Yes, hello, Professor Gordon. My question is, when you mentioned that some people can experience burnout by helping others, that's something I haven't heard of before, because in school we were taught if you're selfless, like Martin Luther King Jr. or Gandhi, just give yourself up for others all the time selflessly, then you'll find meaning of that itself, and that'll push you to drive forward. But I haven't heard about getting burned out from that. Can you elaborate further on that, Professor?
Yeah, there are quite a few. There's a lawyer, a UCLA law professor, who wrote a book about his own burnout. He is a social justice lawyer. I will, before we finish this, I will try to remember the name of the book and his name, because my brain is going in too many directions at this moment. But let's take Gandhi for an example. So Gandhi was a selfless human being, and he created revolution peacefully, and he was an amazing human being and a lawyer. And Gandhi also knew how to recharge and regenerate. He meditated. He took time for self-care, I call it self-preservation, actually. And one of the things that happens in the social justice movement here in the US is there's actually a big focus on well-being, because it's like any battery. Look at your phone, look at your computer. If you unplug them long enough, they die out. We also are, our energy, we run on energy, and our energy is not limitless. So, and we have emotional energy. It's not just physiological energy, but when we're engaged emotionally, that drains us as well. So we need to recharge, and we have to be getting enough sleep. That's part of the problem. If you're doing all this work, but you're not sleeping well, sleep is where a lot of what we need occurs. So we really need to sleep. That is a number one priority for 7 hours a night. It's critical to our health and well-being. So somebody smart once said to me, if things aren't going well, ask yourself if you had a good night's sleep. Things start to fall apart. And that's where we get into trouble. So it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to take long vacations, but it means exactly what Angie was talking about. You have to block out time for self-care or self-preservation. Martin Luther King was a family man, and he was a man of faith. And a lot of his recharging came from devotion to his family and his faith, his own internal reflection. This is not a man who just was out there talking. All of that came from a place of reflection. And so he did a lot of inner reflection. And inner reflection means meditating, contemplating. So they did have practices, Gandhi and Martin Luther King, that kept them going. And so in finding out what the practices you need are, also I would say that they were pre-technology. And so they probably were getting more sleep than we got, and things were slower. I remember when I was practicing law that when we wrote a contract, we put it in the mail and mailed it, and then the other lawyer got it 2 days, 3 days later, marked it up for a couple of days, mailed it back. We're talking about a week in going back and forth on a contract. Now it's instantaneous. This is part of the problem, is that then we had time to take a step back. They lived in eras that we weren't on demand and on call every second of the day. That is why it is so important, as Angie said, to block out that time, or you're not going to have it. So yeah, we need to recharge. Sorry, that was kind of long, but yeah.
No, that was a great answer. Thank you, Professor Gordon. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, so other questions in the chat box. You've talked a bit about the jobs where many lawyers have jobs that are very demanding, which seems to make it more difficult for individual lawyers to assert individual needs for balance. Is it too much to hope that we law students will be able to find jobs that don't punish time for taking time?
No, that's fine. Yeah, no, it's not too much to hope. Part of it's going to be on you, but here's the thing. First of all, in a sense, this pandemic may have helped that shift. Some law firms are not shifting, and they are driving their lawyers just as hard now as they were before. But many law firms are recognizing that they need to let their lawyers recharge if they want to get the level of performance that they need from those lawyers. It is not too much to hope. I'd like to mention one other thing. Most lawyers who practice in this country do not practice in big law firms. Big law firms, then I'm talking like over 200, and those aren't considered big law. Those are mid-sized law firms in this country. But firms of over 200 lawyers, or over, I think it's 150 or 200, account for only 14% of our private law firms. Most firms are smaller. They may have 50, they may have 20. And those firms tend to be very, very attuned to the needs of their individual lawyers. They really collaborate. They work together. They are much more attuned because it's a system. It's a finely tuned machine. A law firm's an organism, and it relies on everyone. So you don't necessarily, if you're being pushed toward big law, and you really want to have that balance. There are some big law firms that are looking at that, but you might want to consider, more focused law firms, and design the practice that you want. There are a lot of lawyers out there who are designing their own practices, and they're doing a great job with it. So yes, there is happiness in the law. It's out there, and there are some articles about it.
And can I say one quick thing? I think you do have to do a lot of the work yourself too. You can't just rely on like, okay, oh, these firms are just working me into the ground. No. You have power to control that. Yeah. And I was actually just on another webinar this week with a bunch of lawyers talking about lawyer well-being. And one of the female lawyers said something that I thought was like very illustrative of this fact. She was like, so I'm working at this firm. I am the same level of associate as all the people on, in the offices next to me. And here I am in my office one day, and that day, it just so happened that my work was slow. But the entire month, I had been billing and billing and billing and billing, so many months, but I still felt compelled that I needed to sit in that chair just in case a partner walked by, just in case somebody was there and they needed me. And even though I had basically worked myself into the ground for the last 3 weeks. And then she said, so I walk out of my office to go commiserate with one of my friends who's in the office right next to me, and he wasn't there. And I asked my secretary, I was like, hey, have you seen Matt? And she was like, yeah, he's out surfing. And she was like, wait, what? and she was like, he left at lunch to go surfing. and she was like, here I am having a panic attack in my office because I think somebody's going to walk past and I don't happen to be there. And this man is out there surfing and he does not have a care in the world. And she's like, so I think I realized that I was putting all that pressure on myself and I wasn't paying attention to the fact like other people aren't doing that. So I think, it's very much on you just as much as it is on your employer to be cognizant of, okay, you have to take your time for yourself. And if you're being met with, if you're saying, I need a break, I need time, and your employer is saying no, then you can probably be like, all right, this might not be the place for me to work. But I think, like Judith said, a lot of employers are now more cognizant. They can't just burn out every single associate that comes to work for them. So they're being more lenient about letting people take the time if you're not in the middle of a giant trial or something like that. So you have to keep those conversations going. You have to initiate that conversation. You have to be comfortable enough to ask for the time, and be comfortable enough with yourself to know when you can take the breaks, like when you can go surfing.
The reality is it's modeling. And when you can show that because you had that hour for surfing or for yoga, you come back refreshed and your work is better, they're going to say, thank you. Go for that run. Go meditate. Thank you. Because they get a better work product. And at the end of the day, that's what they care about. So the other thing to realize, and I think this is kind of interesting, is that we're adults. It took me a long time to get there, by the way. I was like that woman. And to get to the point where I just showed up and went, wait, I get to make decisions about me, and then model that. So that was a great point.
Can I make a comment there, ladies? I totally feel like it's an echo about all these things, because it's like learning how to deal with your self-guilty. Because it's like a guilty that you feel when you see that all your coworkers are working all these hours, and that if you don't do the same, even if you're on vacations, you just learn about these after maybe 5 years or 10 years. But at the beginning, you just want to really work hard no matter what. And there are these lots of like internal dialogues about all this drama that nobody asks you about it. Your boss is not asking you to work all this time, but you just feel that you have to. So it's pretty interesting. I totally understand this lady that you were talking about, Angie.
And can I just be frank? I mean, I don't want to sugarcoat it. Women feel it more.
Totally agree.
You, women feel more compelled to do it than men, and I don't know why it is. I would be curious around the science behind this, but I honestly do think more women feel that way. That like, oh my gosh, if I'm seen as I'm not working hard enough, or I'm not doing these things, like I will be fired or I will be penalized or something like that. I find that men are better at being comfortable with the fact I have worked hard enough. I deserve this break. But, I mean, that's just in my experience what I've seen. So especially the women, make sure that you understand that it's okay for you to.
And another comment about Judith, a comment regarding the rest. I remember when I was working with the law firm, I'm not from US, I'm from Costa Rica, but I found a job here in a company. I was pretty lucky. But I remember when I was working for the law firm, and I used to have these super weird dreams about work that I didn't finalize the day before. And then when I woke up, I was just like, I forgot that it was a dream. I was just thinking, oh, what didn't do? What did I forget? My boss is worried about this. And then like after 5 minutes during I was taking a shower, I was like, oh no, this was a dream. It was just a dream. Oh, thanks God. But it was, such a lot. And it's a lot of drama that just came out of our own minds.
It is a lot of drama. And, you know, the mind plays terrible tricks on us. But you mentioned something that I think is worth a note, and that is the word guilt. And there are different kinds of guilt. There's healthy guilt and unhealthy guilt. And the guilt that you were talking about is unhealthy guilt, meaning that it's not objective guilt. You know, if you drive drunk and you hit somebody's mailbox and knock it over, you know, hopefully that's the worst that happens, but that's objective guilt. You did something wrong and you damaged somebody's property. But the guilt you're talking about, which is self-inflicted and just your own mind creating these scenarios, is what would be called unhealthy psychological guilt, and it can definitely be resolved with recognizing, again, what matters to you most, what drives you, how do you improve your performance. We improve our performance by taking care of ourselves, by being the most effective, and we do that when we recognize that this body that we live in has limits, and it has to be taken care of. It doesn't go like a machine nonstop plugged into a wall. We have to recharge. Otherwise the body fails. And when the mind stops thinking, and by the way, drink water, because that's how our brain thinks. You know, it's electrical energy. So understanding a little bit about physiology is really helpful too. There was a question here about student debt. And
I think we also missed a question about support services that you could find at law schools.
Yes.
Can we cover that too?
Yes. So law schools, well, at UCLA they're doing this, and at other law schools they're doing it as well. Most law schools have counseling, like they're on campuses with counseling services. The ones that aren't are bringing a counselor on campus for at least part-time to engage with the students. And one of the issues that we had at UCLA, if I recall, was that people were not going to the counselor because the stigma, which frankly, screw it, you know, go see the counselor now before you're spending $500 an hour as a lawyer. So yes, there is support. Law schools are definitely recognizing and the connection between law school and mental well-being or lack thereof. And the AALS, which is the American Association of Law Schools, is coming down very strongly on how to institute well-being practices in law school.
And so, even after law school, a lot of state bar associations have like hotlines where you can call for free counseling for, you know, lots of different issues, everything from addiction to stress. So you can call those free hotlines if you need counseling services. So lots of state bars offer. So don't think that just because you leave law school you won't support you. And then also about the
if you don't have it in law school, you've got to find it. Find your people. Find your people. That's really, I make my students on our first day of class get up and walk around and engage with each other, introduce themselves to people they don't know. We go through this whole thing about the rest of your life is all about your relationships, professional and otherwise. I mean, that's what the long-term studies, Harvard did a longitudinal study that really what makes us happy is the quality of our relationships. So, and in law school, there's very unhealthy competition. So we withdraw, and I get my students to get up there and just start, mixing and matching, and, who knows who's going to make a difference in your life. The person sitting next to you might be the judge you argue your motion in front of in a few years.
And that's why I do these. This is why I have people interact. And then we also do, if you want it to be even more interactive, we have these virtual happy hours every other Friday where you get to come and you get to meet one other person and you literally get to talk to another person for 30 minutes. And, it's great to just start building their relationships now. Don't wait until law school. Start now.
Absolutely. And the people if you're in law school, they are your lifelong colleagues. Don't forget them. These are your, they may not be your best friends for life, but these are people you know for life, and it makes a big difference.
And about the debt question, Leslie, I dropped in a study for you conducted by Access Lex, which is a nonprofit that does a lot of studies on legal education. But they did do a survey on whether the amount of debt that you carry has anything to do with your long-term satisfaction with your law degree. And the answer is yes, there is a correlation. But there was also a lot of people that reported high amounts of debt that felt like it was justified because they were able to get the kinds of jobs they wanted or the kinds of positions that they wanted, or it ultimately aligned with what they wanted for their future careers. So I think that the study also shows that it's not just the number, the amount of debt that impacts you, but like whether or not you felt like that debt was like actually enabled you to accomplish the things that you wanted to accomplish. So
that's the intrinsic motivators. Right? That's our beliefs and our feelings about that external thing. So it all ties together.
For sure. Well, I think this has been great. Thank you so much, Judith, for coming and sharing your knowledge with us. I've really, really enjoyed this, and I'm sure it's going to help a lot of students. So
I'd like to invite anybody who wants to reach out to me. You can let your community know that I'd be happy to hear from anybody who has questions.
Awesome. And I connected with Judith on LinkedIn. So she's on LinkedIn. If you guys want to connect with her there, feel free to connect with her. I will send out a follow-up email to everybody who attended today with the links for all of the resources that we had in the chat box so that you'll get
Great.
that. But other than that, you all have a wonderful, safe, and happy and healthy week. And we will see you next week. We have 2 more meetups next Tuesday and Thursday. And then we'll also have our virtual happy hour next Friday. So if you don't know how to join those, feel free to reach out to me directly. Other than that, I'll see you all soon.
Have a good weekend, everyone.